The river's deafening roar nearly drowned out Lydia Foster's screams as her body tumbled through the churning waters of the Powder River. The spring flood had come early in 1878, transforming the normally placid Wyoming waterway into a raging torrent that showed no mercy to those caught in its path. Thomas Dawson heard her cries from his position on the riverbank where he'd been tracking a wounded deer. The seasoned cowboy didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, he dropped his rifle, kicked off his boots, and plunged into the icy waters. The current immediately seized him, nearly stealing his breath with its frigid grip, but his eyes remained fixed on the flash of blue calico disappearing around the bend. "Hold on," he shouted, though he doubted she could hear him over the roaring rapids. The river pulled him under, tumbling him against hidden rocks before he fought his way back to the surface, gasping. He caught another glimpse of her pale face, dark hair streaming in the water before she vanished again. Thomas had never been one for thinking things through. At 30 years old, he'd spent most of his life making split-second decisions that others called foolhardy. As the ranch foreman for the rocking age, he was respected but known for his impulsive nature. Now, as the powerful current dragged him downstream, he wondered if he'd finally met his match. Lydia had been crossing at what locals called the shallow ford when her horse had stumbled on the slick riverbed. The normally sure-footed mare had panicked, throwing Lydia into the swollen river before scrambling up the bank without her. At 23, Lydia had grown up near water all her life, but the force of this current was unlike anything she'd experienced. Each time she fought her way to the surface, another wave would crash over her head, filling her lungs with water and her mind with terror. The rapids dragged her downstream at a terrifying pace. She glimpsed flashes of the shoreline trees and bushes rushing by in a green blur. Her sodden skirts wrapped around her legs like chains, pulling her deeper. Just as darkness began to edge her vision, someone grabbed her arm. "I've got you." A voice shouted near her ear. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against a solid chest. "Stop fighting me. Let me get us to shore." Lydia ceased her thrashing, allowing the stranger to maneuver them toward the riverbank. The current fought them, but the man kept them afloat with powerful kicks. When her feet finally touched the muddy bottom, she nearly collapsed with relief. Together they staggered onto the grassy bank, falling to their knees in exhaustion. For long moments, they simply gasped for air, water streaming from their clothes and hair. Thomas recovered first, pushing wet hair from his eyes to examine the woman he'd rescued. Her dark hair hung in dripping tangles around a face that, despite being pale with fear and cold, struck him as remarkably beautiful. "You all right, miss?" he managed between breaths. Lydia nodded, coughing up river water. "Yes, thanks to you." She looked up, taking in her rescuer tall and lean, with sharp features softened by concerned green eyes. "You jumped in after me. You could have died." Thomas shrugged, a smile touching his lips despite his exhaustion. "Couldn't very well let you drown. Now could I? Most men would have thought twice about jumping into spring rapids. Never been accused of thinking too much, madam." He extended a hand. "Thomas Dawson. Folks call me Tom." "Lydia Foster." She took his offered hand, surprised at the warmth in his calloused grip. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Dawson." "Tom," he corrected, helping her to her feet. "And no thanks needed. Where were you headed before the river decided to take you for a ride?" Lydia brushed ineffectually at her soaked dress. "Timberline. I'm the new schoolteacher." Thomas's eyebrows rose. "Timberline? That's where I'm from. Work at the rocking age just outside town." He glanced around, noting the position of the sun. "We've been carried a fair ways downstream. Nearest crossing's about 3 miles north." Lydia's face fell. "My horse. Likely headed back to town by now. Smart animals, horses. But you're in luck." He pointed to a stand of cottonwoods. "My gelding should still be tethered back where I was hunting. If we cut through those trees, we can reach him and be in Timberline by nightfall. I couldn't impose, it's no imposition. Can't leave you out here alone, especially not soaked through." His eyes took in her shivering form. "We need to get you dry before you catch your death." They began walking, their squelching boots and squeaking leather creating an awkward rhythm. Thomas kept a respectful distance, but remained close enough to catch Lydia should her legs give out. "What brings a schoolteacher all the way out to Timberline?" he asked, pushing aside a low-hanging branch for her. Not exactly the center of civilization. That's precisely why I came, Lydia replied, stepping carefully over a fallen log. The advertisement said they hadn't had a proper teacher in 3 years. Those children deserve an education, regardless of where they live. Thomas studied her with newfound respect. Noble sentiment. Most Eastern ladies I've met wouldn't dream of coming to a place like Timberline. I'm from Missouri, not the East, she corrected. And I'm not afraid of a little hard work or rough living. The river might suggest otherwise, he teased gently. To his surprise, she laughed a bright, unexpected sound in the wilderness. Fair point, Mr. Dawson. Perhaps I should add river navigation to my list of skills to acquire. They reached his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding who nickered at Thomas's approach. The animal seemed unbothered by their bedraggled appearance, standing patiently as Thomas checked his saddlebags. We're in luck, he announced, pulling out a worn but dry blanket. Wrap this around yourself. The sun's still got a few hours before setting, so we might get your clothes partially dried before we ride. Lydia accepted the blanket gratefully. Would you mind? She gestured for him to turn around. Of course, madam. Thomas turned his back, focusing intently on adjusting his horse's saddle. Just let me know when you're decent. Lydia quickly removed her outer dress, wringing the water from it before draping it over a nearby bush. The blanket covered her sufficiently in her chemise and petticoat, both of which clung uncomfortably to her skin. You can turn around now, she said, clutching the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Thomas had removed his vest and outer shirt, leaving him in a damp undershirt that did little to hide his lean, muscular frame. Lydia found herself looking away, a flush warming her cheeks despite her chilled state. Got a small fire starting, he said, kneeling beside a growing flame. Nothing fancy, but it'll help dry us out. As they sat by the modest fire, silence settled between them, not entirely uncomfortable, but weighted with the strange intimacy of their situation. Two strangers, brought together by crisis, now sharing a fire and waiting for their clothes to dry. Have you been in Timberline long? Lydia asked, breaking the quiet. About 8 years now. Came west after the war, looking for open spaces. Thomas poked at the fire with a stick. Found work at the Rocking H and eventually worked my way up to foreman. You fought in the war? She asked softly. He nodded, his expression closing slightly. Union side. Lost my pa at Shiloh. Figured there wasn't much left for me in Tennessee after that. I'm sorry, Lydia said. My brother went to war too. He came back, but sometimes I think part of him never left those battlefields. Thomas's eyes met hers, recognition passing between them, the shared understanding of those who'd seen the war's aftermath firsthand. Anyway, he continued, voice lightening, Timberline's a good place. Rough around the edges, but good people for the most part. They'll be pleased to finally have a teacher. And what about you, Mr. Dawson? Do you place much value on education? A slow smile spread across his face. I can read and cipher well enough, though I won't be solving any complicated mathematics. But yes, Miss Foster, I do value learning. More than most might guess. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. Their clothes, while not completely dry, had lost their dripping wetness. We should get moving if we want to reach town before full dark, Thomas said, standing and retrieving his shirt from the branch where it hung. Lydia gathered her dress, turning away to slip it over her still damp undergarments. The fabric felt clammy against her skin, but it was vastly improved from its earlier state. Thomas mounted first, then extended his hand down to her. I'm afraid we'll have to ride double. Buttermilk here is strong enough to carry us both. Lydia hesitated only briefly before accepting his help. He swung her up behind him with surprising ease. You'll want to hold on, he advised as the horse shifted beneath their combined weight. Gingerly, Lydia placed her hands at his waist, trying to maintain a proper distance despite their circumstances. As they set off, however, the horse's movement forced her to tighten her grip or risk falling. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's gait and the soft sounds of the wilderness creating a strangely peaceful atmosphere despite the day's events. Lydia found herself growing increasingly aware of the man before her, the solid warmth of his back against her chest, the faint scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to him. You saved my life today, she said quietly, her words nearly lost in the gentle breeze. I don't know that I can ever repay such a debt. Thomas was quiet for so long that Lydia wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a warmth that surprised her. There's no debt between us, Miss Foster. Some things a man does because they need doing, not for any reward. Still, you risked everything for a stranger. That's not something I'll forget. He turned slightly, his profile visible to her in the fading light. Then perhaps instead of thinking about repayment, you might consider it the beginning of a friendship. I think I'd like that, Lydia replied, a smile in her voice. As they crested a hill, the scattered lights of Timberline came into view in the distance, a small collection of buildings nestled in a valley surrounded by towering pines. It wasn't nothing like the bustling towns Lydia had known in Missouri, but as they approached, she felt a curious sense of anticipation. Welcome to Timberline, Miss Foster, Thomas said. It may not look like much, but it's home. The small town consisted of a main street with a dozen or so buildings, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and various other businesses necessary for frontier life. A few houses dotted the periphery, with more scattered farms and ranches in the surrounding countryside. As they rode into town, several people turned to stare at the sight of Thomas Dawson riding double with a bedraggled woman. A stout man with an impressive mustache stepped from the general store's porch, eyes widening in recognition. Tom, that you? We've been worried sick about Miss Foster. Her horse came back without her hours ago. Thomas dismounted before helping Lydia down. Found her in the river, Mr. Miller. The ford was higher than she expected. Samuel Miller, owner of Timberline's general store and de facto mayor, rushed forward. Good Lord, are you all right, Miss Foster? Lydia straightened her damp dress, painfully aware of her disheveled appearance. I'm quite well, thanks to Mr. Dawson. He pulled me from the river at considerable risk to himself. Miller's eyes darted between them, clearly calculating the hours they'd spent alone together. Lydia recognized the look. She'd seen it often enough in small towns where propriety and reputation were valued currency. Well, Miller said finally, the important thing is you're safe. Mrs. Miller has been beside herself with worry. We've prepared the old Jenkins place for you, as arranged. Thank you, Lydia said. I apologize for causing alarm. No need for apologies. Tom here is one of our best men, lucky he found you. Miller turned to Thomas. The boys at the saloon will want to hear this tale, I reckon. Thomas shook his head. Another time perhaps. Right now, I should see Miss Foster safely to her house. She's had quite an ordeal. Miller nodded, though his eyes held a speculative gleam. Of course. The Jenkins place is just past the church, Miss Foster. Small white house with blue shutters. After bidding Miller good night, Thomas led his horse down the street with Lydia walking beside him. The few townspeople still out at this hour watched them with undisguised curiosity. Small towns, Thomas murmured. By tomorrow, there'll be 3 different versions of how I rescued you circulating. And will any of them be accurate? Lydia asked, a hint of amusement in her voice despite her fatigue. Not likely. Miller's wife will have us engaged by breakfast. Lydia laughed softly. Well, that would be quite the whirlwind courtship. They arrived at a neat cottage set back from the road. Despite its small size, it looked welcoming with its fresh paint and small garden patch. This is me, then, Lydia said, stopping at the gate. Thank you again, Mr. Dawson, for everything. Thomas removed his hat, holding it against his chest. It was my pleasure, Miss Foster. Despite the circumstances. He hesitated, then added, the school's just behind the church. If you need anything while you're getting settled, the rocking age is about 2 miles north of town. I'll remember that. She extended her hand, which he took gently. Good night, Mr. Dawson. Good night, Miss Foster. Welcome to Timberline. As Lydia entered her new home, she was acutely aware of Thomas waiting until she was safely inside before leading his horse away. She stood by the window, watching his tall figure recede into the gathering darkness, wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Little did she know that Thomas Dawson was having similar thoughts as he rode toward the ranch, replaying the day's events in his mind. The moment he'd seen her struggling in the water, something had shifted inside him, an instinct deeper than thought. He'd jumped without hesitation, without calculating risks or consequences. And despite the danger they'd faced, Despite the lingering chill of the river that still clung to his bones, Thomas couldn't bring himself to regret it. Not when it had brought Lydia Foster into his life. The next morning, Lydia woke to the sound of birds and distant livestock. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar ceiling and the musty scent of the small house confusing her senses. Then memory returned: the river, the rescue, and the cowboy who had saved her life. She rose and dressed in one of the few dresses that hadn't been in her trunk, which was presumably still strapped to her runaway horse. The cottage was sparsely furnished but clean, with a small kitchen, a sitting room, and a bedroom just large enough for a bed and dresser. It was far more modest than her family home in Missouri, but it felt like a palace after her journey west. A knock at the door startled her from her inspection. Opening it, she found an older woman with silver-streaked hair and a basket over one arm. "Good morning, dear. I'm Martha Miller. My husband told me about your ordeal yesterday. I've brought some breakfast and a few essentials to tide you over." "That's very kind, Mrs. Miller. Please, come in." Martha bustled inside, setting her basket on the small table. "Samuel's sent one of the boys to look for your trunk. Should be found by midday, I expect." She studied Lydia with undisguised interest. "You certainly caused quite a stir, arriving the way you did. Thomas Dawson rescuing you from the river. It's like something from a dime novel." Lydia smiled politely, unpacking the basket to find fresh bread, preserves, and a small crock of butter. "Mr. Dawson was very gallant. I'm afraid I would have drowned without his intervention." "Oh, Tom's always been one to leap before looking," Martha said, waving a hand. "Been that way since he arrived here. But he's a good man, one of our finest." She paused, her expression turning speculative. "And unmarried, you know." "Mrs. Miller," Lydia began, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Oh, don't mind me," Martha laughed. "It's just that we don't get many unmarried ladies in Timberline, especially not ones as pretty as yourself. The menfolk will be falling all over themselves to court you. I've come to teach, not to find a husband," Lydia said firmly, though without rancor. "The children of Timberline deserve an education." Martha's expression softened. "And that's precisely why you'll fit in here, dear. We need people who care about more than just themselves." She gestured to the basket. "There's a jar of my wild blackberry preserves in there. Best in the county, if I do say so myself." They chatted a while longer, with Martha filling Lydia in on the town's history and residents. Timberline had been founded just after the war, growing from a simple trading post to a modest settlement serving the surrounding ranches and farms. The school had been built 3 years prior, but teachers came and went, rarely staying more than a season. The last one was a young man from back east, Martha explained. Lasted 6 weeks before deciding Wyoming winters weren't to his liking. The children have had only sporadic lessons since then, mostly from whoever in town has the time and inclination. "Well, I intend to stay," Lydia assured her. "I've signed a contract for the full school year, and I honor my commitments." After Martha left, promising to send someone to guide her to the school, Lydia enjoyed a simple breakfast before preparing for her first day in Timberline. She was arranging her few belongings when another knock came at the door. This time, it was a young boy of perhaps 12, with sandy hair and freckles spread across a sunburned face. "Morning, Miss Foster. I'm Ethan Wilcox. Ma sent me to show you to the schoolhouse and help get it ready." "Thank you, Ethan. That's very kind of your mother." The boy shuffled his feet. "Ma says it's only proper, seeing as I'll be one of your students." He glanced up at her. "Is it true that Tom Dawson pulled you from the river yesterday?" "Pa says Tom jumped in without even taking off his gun belt." Lydia smiled. "Mr. Dawson did rescue me from the river. Yes, though he was wise enough to leave his weapons behind. Are you friends with him?" Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "Everyone knows Tom. He taught me to rope last summer, and he let me help with the spring branding at the rocking age." His eyes widened suddenly. "Oh, I nearly forgot. Your horse came back to our place yesterday. Pa's got your trunk and things." Relief washed over Lydia. "That's wonderful news. I was worried I'd lost everything. Pa said he'd bring it by later. Said your books might be damp, though." "Better damp than lost entirely," she replied. "Shall we see this schoolhouse of mine?" Ethan led her through town, pointing out various buildings and introducing her to people they passed. Timberline was coming alive for the day, with shopkeepers opening their establishments and ranch hands making purchases before heading back to their work. Several people called greetings, eyeing her with open curiosity. The schoolhouse was a simple structure behind the white steepled church, a single room with rows of rough-hewn benches and desks, a teacher's desk on a small platform, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. Large windows provided ample light, though several panes were cracked or missing entirely. "It ain't much," Ethan said, watching her expression. "But it's dry when it rains, and warm enough in winter." "It's perfect," Lydia replied, meaning it. The building needed work, the floor wanted sweeping, the windows repairing, and every surface a good scrubbing, but she could see its potential. "How many students should I expect?" "About 20, give or take. More in winter when the ranch work slows. Some live too far to come every day." They spent the morning cleaning, Ethan proving surprisingly helpful despite his initial reluctance. Around midday, several women from town arrived with food and additional cleaning supplies, all eager to meet the new teacher who'd survived the river. By late afternoon, the schoolhouse was transformed, floors swept, windows washed, and desks arranged in neat rows. Lydia had discovered a small library of books in a cabinet, many worn but still usable, and a supply of slates and chalk. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She was arranging the books when a familiar voice came from the doorway. "Place looks better than it has in years." Thomas Dawson stood in the entrance, hat in hand, looking considerably more put together than when she'd last seen him. His dark hair was neatly combed, his clothing clean and pressed, though still distinctly that of a working cowboy. "Mr. Dawson," Lydia greeted him, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance after hours of cleaning. "What brings you to town?" "Ranch business," he replied, stepping inside and glancing around approvingly. "And I thought I'd check on how you were settling in. Seems you've been busy." "There was much to be done, but it's coming along nicely." She gestured to the transformed space. "The children deserve a proper learning environment." Thomas nodded, running a hand along one of the freshly cleaned desks. "You know, I helped build these when we first put up the schoolhouse. Wasn't sure they'd ever see proper use." "You built these?" "Some of them. Most of the men in town contributed something. The community wanted a school, even if we couldn't keep a teacher." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Which makes your arrival all the more important." Something in his gaze made Lydia's heart quicken, and she busied herself with the books to hide her reaction. "Well, I intend to make it worth the community's investment, though I may need some help with those windows before winter." "Consider it done." Thomas moved closer, picking up a worn copy of Shakespeare's works. "First book I ever read cover to cover was Julius Caesar. Ranch owner's wife taught me to read properly." "You enjoy Shakespeare?" Lydia couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Thomas smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Don't let the hat and boots fool you, Miss Foster. Some cowboys have a fondness for the finer things, even out here in the wilderness." Before Lydia could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Wilcox with her trunk. The conversation shifted to practical matters: where to place her belongings, the condition of the books inside, mostly salvageable, thankfully, and plans for the school's opening the following Monday. As the men prepared to leave, Thomas lingered by the door. "There's a social at the church tomorrow evening. Sort of a welcome for you, though Martha didn't want to overwhelm you with the news just yet." He twisted his hat in his hands. "I thought you might like to know ahead of time." "Thank you," Lydia replied, touched by his consideration. "I'll be sure to attend." "Good. That's good." He settled his hat back on his head. "I'll see you there then, unless you need anything before." "I think I'm well taken care of, Mr. Dawson, but I appreciate the offer." He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Tom, remember? Tom," she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate. "Until tomorrow, then." As he left, Lydia found herself watching his departure just as she had the night before. There was something about Thomas Dawson that intrigued her beyond his act of heroism, a complexity that belied his straightforward cowboy exterior. The church social the following evening was clearly the event of the season in Timberline. It seemed everyone from town and the surrounding ranches had crowded into the small church hall, bringing dishes of food and their best attempts at finery. For many of the ranch hands, this meant a clean shirt and polished boots. For the women, dresses that had been carefully preserved for special occasions. Lydia wore one of her better dresses of blue cotton with white trim that had mercifully survived the journey in her trunk. She'd spent extra time arranging her hair, telling herself it was only proper to make a good impression on her new community. The moment she entered, conversation quieted briefly before swelling into a chorus of greetings and introductions. She was passed from family to family, trying to memorize names and faces, accepting well wishes and thinly veiled questions about her background and marital status. Thomas arrived later, after most of the festivities had begun. Lydia noticed him immediately standing taller than most men in the room, his presence commanding attention without effort. Several young women gravitated toward him, but his eyes scanned the crowd until they found her. He made his way to her side during the refreshment period, offering her a cup of punch. "Surviving the Inquisition?" he asked quietly. Lydia accepted the cup, her fingers brushing his briefly. "Barely. I believe I've been asked about my family history back to my great-grandparents, and Mrs. Peterson seemed particularly interested in whether I have any understanding with a gentleman back home." "And do you?" The question was casual, but his eyes watched her intently. "No," she replied simply. "My focus has been on my career, not matrimony." Relief flickered across his features before he schooled his expression. "Well, you're a novelty here. An unmarried lady teacher with education and refinement. You can't blame them for being curious. I don't. In fact, everyone has been very welcoming." She sipped her punch. "I understand you're something of a local hero, even before fishing schoolteachers from rivers." Thomas looked embarrassed. "People exaggerate. I've just been lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time on occasion." Before she could press further, the small band struck up a lively tune, and couples began forming for a dance. Thomas set down his cup. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Foster?" "I'm not certain that's wise," she replied, though she found herself wanting to accept. "There's already enough speculation about us after yesterday's adventure." "All the more reason," he countered. "If we act as though there's something to hide, they'll be convinced there is. One dance between new acquaintances is perfectly respectable." His logic was sound, and Lydia found herself placing her hand in his. "One dance, then, Mr. Dawson." The dance was a simple country reel, nothing like the formal balls Lydia had attended back home, but there was a genuine joy in the movements that more sophisticated gatherings often lacked. Thomas proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer, guiding her through the steps with confidence. "You dance well for a cowboy," she remarked as they circled each other. "Ranch owner's wife again," he replied with a grin. Mrs. Harrison believed every man should know how to dance properly, no matter his station. "Spent one whole winter teaching all the hands." "She sounds remarkable." She was. Passed on 2 winters ago. The whole county mourned her. The dance brought them together, then apart, then together again. Each time they connected, Lydia felt an increasing awareness of him, the strength in his hands, the grace of his movements, the warmth in his eyes when they met hers. One dance became 2, then 3, until Lydia became conscious of the speculative glances being cast their way. She begged off the 4th dance, citing the need to meet more of her future students' parents. As the evening progressed, she found herself repeatedly drawn back to Thomas's side, their conversations flowing easily despite the constant interruptions from well-meaning townspeople. He told her about his work at the Rocking H, about the challenges and rewards of ranch life in Wyoming territory. She shared stories of her teaching experiences in Missouri and her dreams for the Timberline School. "You really intend to stay?" he asked as they stood on the church steps later that night, the social winding down around them. "I signed a contract for a year," she replied. "But yes, I hope to stay longer. These children deserve consistency." Thomas studied her face in the lantern light. "Timberline's a hard place, especially in winter. Many folks who come with good intentions find themselves yearning for more civilized surroundings when the snows hit. I'm made of sterner stuff than I appear, Mr. Dawson." She met his gaze steadily. "The river didn't defeat me, and neither will a Wyoming winter." A slow smile spread across his face. "No, I don't imagine much could defeat you, Lydia Foster." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in his tone made it sound like a caress. Before she could respond, Martha Miller appeared at her elbow, effectively ending their private conversation. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of farewells and promises to visit, with Thomas maintaining a respectful distance but never straying far from sight. When it came time to leave, he insisted on walking her home despite the short distance. They strolled in companionable silence through the quiet town, the stars brilliantly clear in the Wyoming sky. "Thank you for the escort," Lydia said as they reached her gate. "Though I'm certain I could have managed the 100 yards safely." "No doubt," he agreed. "But my mother raised me better than to let a lady walk home alone after dark, no matter the distance." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." His expression softened with memory. "She'd have liked you, I think. She always valued education. Taught me my letters before she passed." The personal revelation touched Lydia. "You've lost both parents, then?" Thomas nodded. "Mother to fever when I was 10, father in the war. It's partly why I came west, too many ghosts back in Tennessee." "I'm sorry," she said softly, understanding the weight of his losses. "It was a long time ago." He looked up at the stars. "Out here, a man can make his own way, build something new. That's what I've been trying to do at the rocking age." They stood in silence for a moment, the night air cool around them, the sounds of the social fading in the distance. Lydia was acutely aware of his presence beside her, solid, reassuring, and increasingly confusing to her carefully ordered plans. "School starts Monday," she said finally, needing to break the moment before it became something she wasn't ready to define. "It does." Thomas stepped back, returning to his more formal demeanor. "I should let you rest. Good night, Miss Foster." "Good night, Mr. Dawson. Thank you again for the dances." He tipped his hat and waited until she was safely inside before turning away. Through the window, Lydia watched him walk down the street, his figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. The weekend passed quickly as Lydia made final preparations for school. Several parents brought their children to meet her, all expressing enthusiasm for having a permanent teacher again. By Sunday evening, her classroom was ready, her lessons planned, and her mind firmly focused on her responsibilities. Or at least, that was what she told herself. In truth, thoughts of Thomas Dawson continued to intrude at unexpected moments. The memory of his arms around her in the river, the warmth in his eyes during their dance, the quiet conversations that revealed depths beyond the simple cowboy exterior. Monday morning dawned clear and bright. Lydia arrived at the schoolhouse early, arranging her desk and checking that everything was in order. As the children began to arrive, some on foot, others on horseback or in wagons with siblings, she greeted each one by name, having memorized the school roster Martha had provided. The day passed in a flurry of assessments and introductions. As she'd expected, the children's education levels varied widely. Some could barely write their names, while others showed surprising aptitude in mathematics or reading. By afternoon, she had begun grouping them according to ability rather than age, a system that seemed to work well for the mixed classroom. She was dismissing the students when she noticed Thomas leaning against a tree near the schoolyard, watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. Several children called greetings to him as they passed, which he returned with easy familiarity. When the last student had departed, he approached, removing his hat as he entered the schoolhouse. "Successful first day?" he asked, surveying the classroom with its evidence of recent use, chalk dust in the air, papers stacked on her desk, a sentence still written on the blackboard. "Very," she replied, unable to suppress her smile. "They're eager learners, most of them. Even the older boys who pretended indifference were participating by the end." "You have a way with them," Thomas observed. "Young Billy Travis hasn't spoken 3 words together since his mother died last winter, but I saw him answering your questions today." Lydia's heart warmed at the observation. "He has a quick mind beneath that quiet exterior." "They all do, in their own ways." Thomas nodded, running his fingers along the edge of a desk. "I rode past your place this morning. Noticed your roof looks to be missing some shingles on the north side. Rain's coming later this week." "Oh," Lydia frowned. "I hadn't noticed. I've got some spare shingles at the ranch. Thought I might come by tomorrow after your classes and fix it, if that's acceptable." The offer touched her. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose on your time." "It's no imposition," he assured her. "Besides, I promised to help with those windows too, remember? Might as well tackle both jobs." Lydia studied him, curious about his motivations. You seem very invested in my comfort in Timberline, Mr. Dawson. A faint color touched his tanned cheeks. The town needs a teacher. Can't have you getting rained on and changing your mind about staying. There was more to it than that. They both knew, but Lydia accepted the explanation with a nod. Very well. I'd be grateful for the help. The next few weeks established a pattern. Thomas would appear regularly, sometimes at the schoolhouse to repair windows or build bookshelves, sometimes at her cottage to fix the roof or chop firewood for the coming winter. Each visit was ostensibly practical, yet they both knew his presence had become about more than simple repairs. Their conversations deepened as they grew more comfortable with each other. Thomas spoke of his dreams for his own ranch someday, his love for the wild beauty of Wyoming, his quiet passion for books and learning. Lydia shared her childhood in Missouri, her struggles to be taken seriously as an educator, her hopes for her students' futures. The townspeople noticed, of course. Whispers followed them when they were seen walking together after church or sharing a meal at the general store's small lunch counter. Some of the gossip was benevolent, some speculative, some tinged with envy from other single women who had set their sights on the handsome ranch foreman. Lydia tried to maintain a professional distance, reminding herself of her purpose in Timberline. She was here to teach, not to find romance. Yet she couldn't deny the growing attraction between them. The way her heart quickened when Thomas appeared, the sense of loss she felt when ranch duties kept him away for days at a time. As autumn deepened, painting the surrounding hills with gold and crimson, Thomas invited her to ride with him one Saturday to see a particularly beautiful valley beyond the town. The aspens are at their peak, he explained. Next week's frost will likely take the last of the leaves. It would be a shame for you to miss it your first autumn here. The invitation itself was innocent enough, but Lydia hesitated, aware of the implications of spending a day alone with him. Would it be appropriate? We could ask Martha Miller to join us if you're concerned about propriety, he suggested, though his expression showed he preferred otherwise. Lydia considered for a moment. No, that won't be necessary. I trust your intentions are honorable, Mr. Dawson. A smile touched his lips. Always, Miss Foster. The day of their ride dawned crisp and clear, the sky an impossible blue above the autumn landscape. Thomas arrived at her cottage with 2 horses, his own buckskin gelding, and a gentle mare borrowed from the rocking H. Mrs. Harrison's old mare, he explained as he helped Lydia mount. Sweetest temper of any horse I've known. She'll take good care of you. They rode north out of town, following game trails that wound through stands of pine and aspen. Thomas proved to be an excellent guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's history, both settler and native. His knowledge of the land was intimate, born of years exploring its contours on horseback. Around midday, they crested a rise to find a sweeping vista spread before them, a valley awash in autumn colors, bisected by a clear stream that caught the sunlight like scattered diamonds. It's breathtaking, Lydia murmured, reining her horse to a stop beside his. Thought you'd appreciate it. Thomas's voice held quiet satisfaction. Not many from back east take the time to see the beauty here. They're too busy complaining about what Wyoming lacks to notice what it offers. I'm not from back east, she reminded him with a smile. Missouri has its own beauty, but this. She gestured to the panorama before them. This is something altogether different. They dismounted in a small clearing by the stream, where Thomas spread a blanket and unpacked a lunch he'd brought in his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried apple slices, and a jar of preserves he'd acquired from Martha Miller. As they ate, their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences as they enjoyed the scenery. Lydia found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did, the constant awareness of her position as town teacher temporarily set aside. May I ask you something personal? Thomas said as they finished their meal. You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer. He smiled at that. Fair enough. I was wondering why you never married. A woman with your intelligence and beauty, forgive my presumption, but I imagine you had opportunities. Lydia considered the question. There were a few suitors, she acknowledged, but none who saw me as more than an ornament or a convenient household manager. The men who courted me expected me to abandon my teaching once married. She looked out over the valley. I wasn't willing to sacrifice my calling for a marriage of convenience. Thomas nodded slowly. And if you found someone who supported your teaching, who saw it as part of who you are, not something to be discarded. The question hung between them, its implications clear. Lydia's heart quickened as she met his gaze. "I've never met such a man," she said quietly. "Until perhaps recently." Thomas reached across the blanket, his hand covering hers. "Lydia." Whatever he intended to say was interrupted by a distant rumble of thunder. They both looked up to see dark clouds building rapidly over the western mountains, an autumn storm approaching faster than either had anticipated. "We should head back," Thomas said, reluctantly releasing her hand. "Those clouds mean business." They quickly packed up their picnic, mounted their horses, and started back toward town. The temperature dropped noticeably as the storm front approached, the wind picking up and sending fallen leaves swirling around them. They had covered perhaps half the distance to Timberline when the storm overtook them. The first heavy raindrops quickly gave way to a driving downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards. Lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by crashing thunder. "There's a line shack about a quarter-mile east," Thomas shouted over the storm's roar. "We'll never make it to town in this." Lydia nodded, water streaming from the brim of her hat as she followed Thomas's lead. The horses picked their way carefully over the increasingly muddy ground, heads lowered against the stinging rain. The line shack, a small, crude cabin used by cowboys during roundup, appeared through the curtain of rain like a vision of salvation. Thomas dismounted quickly, leading both horses to the small attached lean-to before helping Lydia down. They stumbled inside, dripping and breathless. The cabin was simple, a single room with a small iron stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, a narrow cot against one wall, and shelves holding basic provisions. "Not exactly luxury accommodations," Thomas said, shaking water from his hat. "But it'll keep us dry until the storm passes." Lydia removed her sodden jacket, acutely aware of the intimacy of their situation. They were alone, miles from town, with no chance of return until the weather cleared. The impropriety of it would scandalize Timberline if known. Yet as Thomas busied himself lighting the stove and finding dry blankets from a trunk, she found she couldn't summon the appropriate concern. There was no one she trusted more than the man who had already risked his life to save hers. "Here," he said, handing her a rough wool blanket. "It's not fancy, but it's dry. You should get out of those wet clothes before you catch cold." Seeing her hesitation, he added, "I'll step outside to check on the horses. Take your time." Once alone, Lydia quickly removed her drenched dress and petticoats, wrapping herself in the blanket. The rough wool was scratchy against her skin, but blessedly dry. She hung her garments near the stove, hoping they would dry before evening. When Thomas returned, equally drenched, she faced away while he changed into spare clothes he found in the cabin, worn but dry trousers and a faded flannel shirt left by previous occupants. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the small windows, thunder rolling across the valley. "Looks like we're here for a while," Thomas said, feeding more wood into the stove. "Storm's getting worse, not better." Lydia nodded, tightening the blanket around her shoulders. "People will talk when we return." "They will," he agreed, his expression serious. "Your reputation is already the subject of gossip," she finished for him. "From the moment you pulled me from the river." Thomas ran a hand through his damp hair. "I never meant to compromise your standing in the community. If there's anything I can do to make this right." The unspoken question hung between them. Lydia knew what he was offering: marriage to protect her reputation, if necessary. The honorable solution to their predicament. But was that all it would be? "Thomas," she said softly, using his given name deliberately. "Did you mean what you asked earlier? About a man who would support my teaching?" He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Every word. Lydia, I've never met anyone like you. These past weeks, getting to know you. I find myself thinking about you when we're apart, looking forward to every moment in your company." Her heart pounded as he took her hand in his. "I didn't come to Timberline looking for this," she admitted. "But I can't deny what I'm feeling either." "And what is that?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Lydia leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, almost tentative, but it sent warmth flooding through her that had nothing to do with the stove's fire. When she pulled back, Thomas's eyes were wide with surprise and something deeper. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb gently tracing her jawline. I've wanted to do that since I pulled you from that river, he confessed. Why didn't you? She asked, leaning into his touch. Because you deserved better than a hasty courtship born of dramatic circumstances. Because I wanted you to know me, the real me, not just the man who happened to be there when you needed rescue. His honesty touched her deeply. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within the cabin, something precious and fragile was taking form between them. They spent the afternoon talking as they never had before, sharing hopes and fears, dreams and disappointments. Thomas spoke of his loneliness since losing his parents, his determination to build something lasting in this wild country. Lydia revealed her struggles against the prejudices that insisted women belonged only in the home, her desire to make a difference in her students' lives. As darkness fell, they shared a simple meal from the cabin's provisions: beans, dried beef, and hard biscuits softened over the stove. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, the wind howling around the cabin's eaves. We'll have to stay the night, Thomas said, stating the obvious. You take the cot. I'll make do on the floor. You'll freeze, Lydia protested, eyeing the narrow distance between the cot and the door. I've slept in worse conditions, he assured her. Besides, your virtue is compromised enough without sharing a bed. Despite the seriousness of their situation, Lydia found herself smiling. My virtue is intact, Mr. Dawson, regardless of appearances, and I trust you completely. The simple statement seemed to move him deeply. He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture of reverence. When we return to town, he said quietly, there will be talk. I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever you decide, I'll stand by you. If you wish me to keep my distance to preserve your position, I'll understand. Lydia studied his face in the flickering light from the stove. And if I don't wish you to keep your distance? Hope kindled in his eyes. Then I would ask your permission to court you properly, no matter what anyone in town might say. I think I would like that very much, she replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. They settled for the night, Lydia on the cot with an extra blanket, Thomas on the floor near the stove with his saddle as a pillow. Despite the impropriety of their situation, there was a sense of rightness to it, as if the storm had swept away pretenses and allowed them to see each other clearly for the first time. Morning brought clear skies and a transformed landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, glistening in the early sunlight. They set out for timberline after a brief breakfast, their damp clothes mostly dried by the stove's heat overnight. As they rode side by side, Lydia felt a curious mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Their return would indeed cause talk, the teacher and the cowboy, caught out overnight in a storm. But the potential damage to her reputation seemed a small price for the understanding they had reached. Whatever happens, Thomas said as they approached the outskirts of town, remember that you're not alone in facing it. Lydia's smile was answer enough. As expected, their arrival caused an immediate stir. They rode directly to Martha Miller's home, where Thomas explained the situation with straightforward honesty: the sudden storm, the shelter in the lined shack, the propriety maintained throughout. Martha, to her credit, accepted the explanation without visible skepticism. These mountain storms can be treacherous, she agreed. Thank the Lord you found shelter. Not everyone in town was as understanding. Over the following days, Lydia endured whispers and speculative glances. A few parents questioned whether she remained an appropriate influence on their children. The school board called a special meeting to discuss the situation. Through it all, Thomas remained steadfast. He attended the board meeting, vouching for Lydia's character and accepting full responsibility for the decision to seek shelter rather than risk the storm. His standing in the community carried weight, and his obvious respect for Lydia helped quell some of the rumors. 2 weeks after their adventure, on a crisp Sunday morning, Thomas approached her after church service, heedless of the watching townspeople. Would you care to join me for dinner at the hotel, Miss Foster? He asked formally, though his eyes held a warmth that was anything but distant. Lydia accepted with equal formality, aware of the statement they were making. By courting her openly, Thomas was declaring his intentions to the community and providing the protection of his reputation for hers. Their courtship progressed with deliberate propriety over the following months. Thomas called on her regularly, always in public settings or her home with the door left considerately ajar. He attended school functions, helped with repairs around the schoolhouse, and made himself a fixture in Lydia's professional life as well as her personal one. Gradually, the gossip faded. Lydia's dedication to her students and her obvious positive influence on their education won over even the most skeptical parents. Thomas's respected position at the Rocking H and his unblemished reputation helped smooth any lingering concerns about her character. As winter settled over Timberline, blanketing the landscape in snow and ice, their relationship deepened. On evenings when weather permitted, they would sit by Lydia's fire, reading together or discussing the day's events. Thomas proved to be not only well-read but thoughtful, his practical wisdom complementing Lydia's more academic knowledge. "I've been saving," he told her one snowy evening as they sat together on her small sofa. "Almost have enough for a down payment on the Cameron Place, 500 acres just north of town. Old man Cameron's moving to Denver to live with his daughter." "Your own ranch," Lydia said, understanding what this meant to him. "That's wonderful, Thomas." He took her hand, his expression serious. "It would be a modest start. Nothing fancy, but it could be something to build on, something that could grow over time." His eyes held her steadily. "Something we could build together, if you were willing." The question in his words was unmistakable. Lydia's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Thomas slid from the sofa to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Lydia Foster, I've loved you since I saw you fighting that river with everything you had. I love your strength, your kindness, your dedication to your students. I love the way you see beauty in this rough country and possibility in everyone you meet." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm asking if you would do me the great honor of becoming my wife." Tears blurred Lydia's vision as she looked down at the man kneeling before her, the cowboy who had jumped into raging rapids without hesitation, who had shown her what true partnership could be. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly. "Yes, Thomas Dawson, I will marry you." His face lit with joy as he rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the promise of their shared future. They were married in the Timberline church that spring, with the whole town in attendance. Martha Miller wept openly, claiming credit for bringing them together, while Mr. Harrison from the Rocking H gave Thomas a week's paid leave and a fine saddle as a wedding present. True to his word, Thomas purchased the Cameron property, and together they began building their dream, a working cattle ranch with a comfortable home that included a small library for Lydia's growing collection of books. Thomas insisted on adding a second room that could serve as a classroom, allowing Lydia to continue teaching during the winter months when travel to town was difficult for the outlying ranch children. 5 years after that fateful day on the Powder River, Lydia stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching Thomas teach their 3-year-old son to ride his first pony in the yard. Their infant daughter slept peacefully in her cradle beside Lydia, her tiny features a perfect blend of her parents. The ranch had prospered under their combined efforts. Thomas's practical knowledge of cattle and land management, complemented by Lydia's organizational skills and business acumen. The Dawson D brand was becoming known for quality throughout the territory. Lydia still taught at the Timberline School, having trained a young woman to assist her on days when ranch duties or motherhood required her presence at home. The school had grown with the town, now boasting 2 rooms and nearly 40 students. As she watched her husband's patient instruction, his strong hands steadying their son on the gentle pony, Lydia's mind drifted back to the moment that had brought them together, the rushing river, the desperate rescue, the beginning of their journey. Thomas looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile still had the power to quicken her heart after all these years. He said something to their son before walking toward the porch, his long stride as confident as ever. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Dawson?" he asked, climbing the steps to stand beside her. "I was just thinking about rivers," she replied, leaning into him as his arms circled her waist. "How sometimes they take you places you never expected to go." Thomas chuckled, understanding her meaning immediately. "Best impulse I ever had, jumping into that one." "No regrets?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face with gentle reverence. "The rapids dragged you downstream, and I jumped without thinking," he said quietly. "And I have never, not once, looked back." Lydia rose on tiptoe to press her lips to his. Their children and their home, and their life together, a testament to the power of that single, impulsive act of courage, a cowboy who had risked everything for a stranger and found his future in the rushing waters of a Wyoming spring.